All right, you ready to run some sports?
Let's do it.
All right, so I'm excited about everything that John was just talking about the four stocks that we highlighted, but the monstrous moves and the unusual option activity. You want to talk about a little bit unusual. The football portal in NCAA football, John, it's a really interesting thing, and I think a lot of people have their own versions of what they like or don't like about it. So you and I are going to discuss that in a second, but I got to highlight one guy. Dillon Gabriel, the quarterback who now is at Oregon. He started 49 games already in his career, John. He will shatter records as far as how many games he will start as a football player, not just quarterback, but as a football player. He could be the first player ever to be named first team all-conference in 3 different conferences. Well, there's a good reason for that. You didn't used to be able to do anything like that either, where you're jumping from team to team and school to school and staying eligible while you're doing it. He started off at Central Florida, then he goes to Oklahoma, then he goes to Oregon. So now he's at Oregon this year. It should be pretty exciting. But, John, what do you think about this? I think personally, I like the portal because you know what? If a player is somewhere and they don't know for sure that they're going to be able to continue to be there, or they're moving for whatever reason, they don't like the coach or something like that, that's understandable. But I think there's got to be some kind of a restriction on this whole thing. I don't like the idea that there are players that literally might play at 5 different universities during their career because they keep moving, jumping from one to the other to the other to the other. Now, I get all the other arguments, and I agree with some of them where you know what, you're not happy, you don't like the coach, you want to play somewhere else. I totally get it. But what do you think about this, John? And should they do restrictions, or am I being a little bit too, I don't know, conservative about it, or what?
Well, I get where you're coming from. I'm playing the devil's advocate, rather, Pete. And that is that not only did I do exactly what Pete described, I played at 3 different universities, 1 different college. So Normandale Junior College. That's right. Normandale Junior College, University of Cal Berkeley, Cornell, and Gustavus Adolphus. So I guess 2 colleges and 2 universities there. But anyway, I like it just because there's a player like this that I may have never seen. Mm-hmm. Now that he's at Oregon, I'll see him. If he stayed at Central Florida, I would never have seen him, Pete, unless I accidentally was just flipping through channels and somehow came across a University of Central Florida, UCF game. I don't watch him. So I'd never see this kid. So I don't mind. I mean, if they want to throw some talent at a different school, I don't mind watching that talent play at that school, because like I say, how many people do I ever see play at North Carolina? Very few, because I don't tend to watch that team. But Oregon, USC, let's not forget Caleb Williams. Where was he before USC, Pete?
Oklahoma.
Exactly. So I like the idea that these guys move around. You can make it a little more exciting, but I understand where you're coming from as a guy who played all 4 years at one school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's not a huge axe on this one. My bigger axe is NIL and how they can figure that out a much better way. If anybody didn't see this, please go and look at Oklahoma football. The linebacker on that team, John's getting a very nice NIL money, right? He came out in front of the team yesterday, stood up in front of them, and he said, I want these 16 or 18 walk-ons to come up here behind me, and they did. And he goes, you know what? I got a lot of money from NIL, but I'm a team player. I'm splitting it with all you guys. How great is that? I want to see Shedeur Sanders do that, John. That'll show me he's a team player. And by the way, they got North Dakota State today, and that might not be a walkover for them. I don't know about that one. That might be kind of interesting because North Dakota State puts out some pretty stud players every year into the NFL. They do a good job.
Yeah. All right. And as just one follow-on to that, Pete, most teams that Colorado would have scheduled for the first game like this that are former Division II and 1A teams wouldn't have the depth. Mm-hmm. These guys have depth, and generally speaking, Colorado does not.
Right.
Because of some of Deion's antics, they have a great team, or at least a very good team, maybe not a great team. They have a very good team, but the depth is not there because a lot of those kids got frustrated and left, and we'll have to see whether or not Deion can keep the thing rolling through a second season and do better than that first season, Pete.
And he's got some issues with some of the reporters out there now too, John, because he's only going to talk to certain people, all that whole thing. I mean, it's starting to maybe implode. And I'll tell you, if they lose game one, and maybe they blow them out today, right? Shedeur is a great quarterback. Hunter's a great football player. So there's a lot of reasons to say, well, they're going to win this game. And they likely will. They should. But if they don't, then what? How are those interviews with Deion after that? I mean, let's be honest. That gets a little bit hairy and a little bit interesting for sure. All right, John, sticking with college football, the SEC. Now, I wanted to point out, who is the smartest team to go and say, you know what, we need to join the SEC for this reason or that reason? Is it Texas? Maybe. Is it Oklahoma? Could be. I'm going to throw somebody out there that nobody's talking about, and they did this in 2012. Missouri. Missouri left the Big 12. They go to the SEC, and I didn't even realize it myself, John. I know they had a great year last year. They went 11-2. That's not a bad year for anybody, and that's in the SEC, playing the SEC teams, right? So you know who's back? The quarterback Cook, he's back. The running back Schrader, he's back. The wide receiver Burton III, he's back. This is a football team that probably doesn't get nearly enough credit from anybody, and they're ranked pretty high this year. They're ranked, I think, number 11, so they're getting credit. But let's talk about that for a second. I mean, these guys have done everything right. They want, one of the reasons they left, John, the Longhorn Network. And I don't know if you remember that whole boondoggle, but they had their own network for Texas, or supposed to be for the Big 12, but clearly it's called the Longhorn Network. I mean, I wonder what that lean is. So you've got that. That was something they didn't like. They didn't like the uncertainty of what was going on with the Pac-12 and all the rest of that, because some of the teams were bouncing around and doing that. And the stability wasn't there because they'd already lost Nebraska to the Big Ten, right? So all of that has happened. And now finally we are seeing, you know, what's happening now, which has been all of this huge movement, but particularly Texas and what we're seeing from some of those schools like Oklahoma as well. What do you think about Mizzou's chances this year? If they were 11-2 last year and they're returning these kind of players, John, this could make for a really interesting year. What if, just what if in the SEC, you got 3 Big 12 teams that finish somewhere in that top 4 sort of an area, maybe behind Georgia or whomever. But that makes this pretty damn interesting, I think, with the Big 12 movement we've gotten out of these guys.
Yeah. And one of the reasons, Pete, is I think it's Columbia, Missouri, where the Tigers play, is a really tough place to play. Not because they have the loudest fans, but it is just stiflingly hot and muggy. And Oklahoma's hot, not as muggy. Arkansas is hot, not as muggy. I mean, the Missouri Valley tends to like just put this cloud on top of these guys that makes it really tough. They run out of gas. And Missouri practices there every day, of course, so they're ready for it. But when people play on the road at Missouri or at Mizzou, it's tough. Yep. So I think as a combination of better players that they've been able to attract and keep, to your point, because all those players you talked about are back, as well as a tough place to play, I think that makes this a very interesting team to watch.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say is the fact that private equity can now get involved in the NFL as far as investing in teams, John, that's an interesting topic right there. Just because, you know, we all know that those PE firms, they can have some ups for sure. They also can have some downs for sure. How's that going to affect the ownership level if they are part of that? And I don't think it's that big a deal personally, but I think you could probably make some arguments why it is a big deal as well.